Awesome. And welcome to the latest episode of the Winter Garden Yoga podcast. I'm really excited to have an excellent yoga teacher and a yoga author with us today. His name is David Keil. David, will you take a minute and just introduce yourself to the folks in case they don't know who you are?
Sure. Well, my name is David Keil, and I'm the author of Functional Anatomy of Yoga. And I've been running yogaanatomy.com for the last 20-something years. Maybe it's at 20 years, 21 maybe. I've been practicing yoga since then and before, actually all the way back to high school. And at this point, I travel and teach workshops, and I have it pretty good.
Awesome. That's great. Awesome.
Pretty good.
And we'll talk a little more about your website, its content, and maybe a little more about your book, both of which I've checked out, both of which are excellent resources. But before we get into that, tell me, how did you even get into yoga?
Short version, long version?
Yeah, short version.
Short version's better. Okay. Long story short was in ninth grade, I found the need to get a better grade in algebra. Okay. So I found myself in the bookstore, a book on self-hypnosis landed in my hand, not magically, but it was there. Right. I used self-hypnosis, which is, sort of like a westernized version of meditation. And you could say perhaps.
Okay.
Anyway, messing with your mind. How's that?
Okay.
And managed to successfully do exactly what I needed to do as a result of that. And that kind of moved into new age exploration. I was cooking in a restaurant where one of the patrons was both a chiropractor and a martial arts expert who taught Tai Chi. I started doing Tai Chi classes with him. He became my first yoga teacher. I'm talking 1988.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And that's when I started doing yoga. I mean, then I went to, university and on and off with the yoga thing. And then by the time 98 rolled around, I was just wrapping up massage school and got back into yoga practice, which is when Yoga Anatomy started and all of that stuff.
Okay. It was Yoga Anatomy. Was it, where did that come from? Was that from the massage therapy? Was that from a need you saw?
A little bit of both of those. I was teaching at a school here in Miami called Educating Hands School of Massage. Mm-hmm. After I graduated, they really wanted me to come back and teach K&P because I was, the superstar in K&P. And I put a lot of that to having some background in using my body through Tai Chi and yoga. I ended up teaching there for 3 years. I taught kinesiology as a course maybe 20 times in that 3-year span, which is a lot, actually. Yeah. And one of the students who came in was a yoga teacher, and her only reason for being there, she was not in the massage program. She just wanted to do the kinesiology part of the course to better her understanding of anatomy and function. And her and I got together. She actually set up the first yoga anatomy workshop. She basically invited all of her teaching friends. And it was like a group of, 15, 16 people. And this is probably 99 or 2000. Not a lot of yoga studios around, but there was one here in Coconut Grove, and that's where we did the workshop. And it went off really well. And from there, I built on that idea. It seemed like there definitely was a need. And one of the skills that I honed in teaching in massage school was taking a complex subject and presenting it in a simple way without trying to not lose the complexity of what's really going on, which, as you understand quite well, I think. It's very complicated. And as soon as we think it's as simple as we would like it to be, it's definitely not. It's always more than that going on. So,
Right.
so that's where Yoga Anatomy was born from. And I started writing articles and, you know, on and on.
And that's something, if people will check out Amazon.com, or if they'll check out your website and look for your book, a lot of the reviews will say, and I think it's even in your description, you make it clear that your book on anatomy is conversational. It says it's almost, and if I'm oversimplifying it, please correct me, but it's just like maybe like a text version of a workshop that you would have, trying to make the really complex easily digestible and easily usable. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did not want to write an anatomy book that no one would want to read or enjoy reading. And so in my mind, as I was writing that book, I held it like I was hanging out with somebody at a coffee shop and I was explaining anatomy to them. That was my intention. And maintaining the conversational style was actually, you know, a little bit of an argument with the publisher, who wanted it to be a more technical book. And I said, there's no reason to take a technical subject and write it technically so that everybody falls asleep while reading it. So that was completely on purpose. Yeah.
And it pays off. I've read your book, and I recommend it. Anyone who is looking for a great resource on yoga anatomy, the application of the anatomy that is discussed in the various chapters. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess it's towards the end of the book, you have the patterns, common patterns that you'll see in certain poses.
Yeah.
Can you talk about maybe, let's say like the top thing you see everywhere you've traveled? What's the one thing you see and you go, we need to address this? The one. There has to be one.
I mean, you know, if it's a one thing, and I think this ties into the back half of the book, the one thing is, I want to change the way people think about postures and how they're done, and even why they're doing it. But even just keeping it tight a little bit and keeping it on the mechanical or functional level, it's getting people to understand that whether you like it or not, you're either going to be compounding an existing pattern, bumping into it, reversing it, or maybe even just fiddling with it on the edges. And it's just getting people to see that you have to do this stuff if you're going to do it, especially, you know, I'm an Ashtanga as well, especially if you're doing an Ashtanga kind of practice or any type of repetitive sequence practice. You need to be really careful how you put these patterns into your body. So I don't know that I can give you one thing. It's like, you know, chaturanga, it's like question everything you've heard, basically, and figure out the way it works in your body. You know, and that's how it is for all of those patterns, really. It's like, take a look at your body. How does your anatomy function, and how are you going to develop that pattern to whatever degree is possible for you in your anatomy?
Gotcha.
It's more about thinking. It's like, you know, the reason for doing that back half of the book was what I didn't want to do was fall into the typical yoga anatomy sort of trap of, oh, this muscle's engaging, oh, this one's relaxing, or oh, this one's getting stretched, or this one's getting strengthened. I don't think it really works that way. I mean, those things happen. That's not false, but I don't think that's the way to think about practice. So I purposely tried to isolate down the most basic patterns that are in existence, how they develop over some basic postures, and you go and think about it. You figure out how to apply this stuff. You know, I don't need to tell you. Do I really need to tell you and your body to engage this muscle so that this one will stretch? Just do the posture and you'll have the experience of that anyway. You don't need to name the muscle that's stretching. It's like, sorry, I'm getting off on it a little.
No, that's fine.
It just doesn't feel like that to me would not make me feel good about writing a book that way. That just,
Right.
yeah.
I understand. So basically, if I'm understanding you correctly, and what's interesting about this is it seems like the message in yoga has changed over the years. And you may correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember we're talking about Ashtanga yoga specifically.
Okay.
And it used to be, the early 21st century is you had to do it this way. It had to come from India to a certified or a blessed instructor to the students. And you didn't point your toes because it didn't come from India to point your toes. You had to keep your arms straight because that's how it was, just like arbitrary rules. Now,
Yes.
have you seen that kind of lighten up these days, or are we veering a little more off the arbitrary path, so to speak?
I think it's going in both directions simultaneously. Like,
okay,
you have super rigid, you have a new generation of highly rigid sort of Ashtanga teachers, and then you have people who've been doing it for long enough to realize that that's not the important part anymore.
right.
Knowing when to, if from the teaching point of view, knowing when a student needs to be disciplined into the sort of tradition versus when they need to be allowed to adapt or modify the tradition for some particular reason. Not everybody's willing to take on that responsibility. So that's why I say it's kind of going in both directions. Some people don't want to do that. They say, this is the way it is in India. That's how it is. Done. Other people are more open and available to changing things. But I have to say, I went to Mysore many times, authorized level 2, the whole thing. They modified postures for students when it was necessary. So I've always held, I've always held that these sort of rules, if you will, or the way in which they do it in Mysore is the goal, so to speak, from a posture point of view only. This is the ideal that you're striving towards. But on the pathway there, if you can't do it, then what do?
Right.
You tried. So you naturally are going to modify. The belief that it shouldn't be or can't be is, I don't agree with that. It's just, that's the nature of it. People do it in Mysore all the time in front of the teachers because they don't have a choice.
Right.
If your knee's in pain and busted up or whatever, they'll tell you not to do lotus. Both Sharad and Guruji, I've saw them many times tell people to skip postures for those reasons. So I don't know where it really comes from. It's a perception more than it is, from my point of view anyway, it's more of a perception than the reality.
Than the reality. Yeah, I understand. And just so our listeners understand, Mysore is a place in India, but it's also a method of practicing yoga.
Yes.
So like you'll hear the Mysore method. There's a group method and a Mysore method. Is that correct?
Yes.
Will you please talk a little bit about the differences between the two?
Sure. The Mysore method or the Mysore style is a group of people do their practice under the observation of the teacher without the teacher telling them what to do all the time. So it's the way John Scott refers to it, which I know you want to talk about, John, which we can, who was my first real Ashtanga teacher. He would call it the self-practice method, because you practice by yourself in a group setting with the teacher, then teaching people on an individual basis. Whereas opposed to the group method is what we often refer to as a led class or a guided class. I would say technically, from a very sort of purist kind of point of view, in Ashtanga in particular, the guided class is for practitioners who already know the practice. it's more for almost you could say a demonstration
Hmm.
of your capabilities as a practitioner than it is a teaching method within the group context.
Got you. So in the context of a Mysore class, the expectation is to move at your own pace, and you are given poses to gradually build up your practice, a self-practice, correct?
Yes.
Whereas if you come to a lead class, you're kind of expected to already know all the way from sun salutation to resting pose. You should know everything. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And
And be relatively proficient in it.
right, right, okay.
Yes.
And the evolution of that, wasn't it just because the classes in Mysore were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they had to wrap their arms around it versus trying to teach uh, 30 or
Well,
40 people Mysore all at once?
it's partly due to numbers, but historically, I would say the group class, or what we call the vinyasa count, which is a whole other rabbit hole, but to
Yeah,
keep that kind of short and tight, every posture has um, has every breath accounted for. Not that every breath is counted per se, but every breath is accounted for, and there is a numbered count to movements or breath movement synchronizations that do happen. And that was used for demonstration purposes
mm,
with small groups. Like when you look at the old pictures from Mysore of, from the Mysore Palace where Pattabhi Joy studied with Krishnamacharya, you'll see group pictures of the students demonstrating. And so that would have, if they were all doing the same postures, then the vinyasa count would have been used to guide them through that.
right.
Which is why I kind of mentioned the demonstration part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Taking it more into modern times, in the old Shala, there was never, which ended in the last year of the old Shala was 2002. To that point, there was never a guided or led or vinyasa count class in Mysore. Never in the place Mysore.
Mm-hmm.
Guruji never did it there. When he would travel and have a large group of students, he would then lead vinyasa count practices or do a guided class with the large groups of people. And when they moved into the new Shala, they started only on Friday, they did led primary series. And then eventually they added on, they had enough people that were showing up, they would do led primary and led second on Sunday for second series practitioners. And then again on Friday, you would have a led primary.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And just so we won't stay in the Ashtanga rabbit hole too long, but just so that people understand, Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga is it 4 levels now, or is it 6 levels?
It depends on how you want to count it.
Right. So somewhere between
six different sequences, you could say. Sometimes
okay.
the last 2 are pushed into the others. So
correct.
Yeah.
So everyone begins with what's called primary series. In primary series, the intent is to prepare the body neurologically and physiologically for the next set of poses. It's called the secondary series or the intermediate series. Is that correct?
Yeah. Their Sanskrit names are, the primary series is called Yoga Chikitsa, which
Mm-hmm.
means yoga therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, both neurologically, physiologically, and physically designed to open, the way I describe it is open the hips and shoulders.
Okay.
Whereas second series is called Nadi Shodhana, which means nerve cleansing. And so you prepare the body, both mentally, physiologically,
right.
physically, and then you do second series, which is more demanding on the nervous system generally.
Mm-hmm.
Deeper back bends, deeper forward bends, yeah. And more intensity in general.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, third series is called Sthira Bhaga, which means strength and grace.
I never knew that. I just learned something new. That's
Good.
cool.
Yeah.
And then maybe a 4th series, if like advanced A and advanced B.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
There's advanced A, B, C, and D.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So most
Yeah.
people, do you know what the percentages are? Like 100% of the people start with primary series,
Yeah. Nobody
5% go to
starts with.
intermediate.
I would say, I think I know where you're going with this. I would say the majority of people practice primary and about half of second series. That's the majority of people.
Gotcha. And then
Yeah.
it just trickles even slimmer up into the more advanced practice.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know that anybody does 6 series.
Yeah. Not anymore. Not since like
Not
the
anymore.
not the old days.
And it's not like those guys practiced it regularly,
Correct. Well,
probably. That was not their daily. Sorry.
supposedly Patabi said the advanced series was for demonstration only,
Yeah, I've heard that.
right? Okay. So that's a little bit about Ashtanga yoga. It's a little bit about Mysore. It's a little bit about lead classes. Do you still practice Ashtanga regularly?
Yes.
The primary series specifically, or do you break it up?
Um, I kind of mix and match a bit these days.
Okay. Are there any poses you avoid these days? Have you softened your practice over the years?
Um, there's not necessarily a pose that I avoid, um, but I'm much happier to. I was interviewed last week, yeah, last week, and it was a similar kind of question, and I think the edge for me is more like letting go of how things used to be.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that I would cut off a posture. It's just I do it. I do it to the degree that I do it, and I don't work it in the way that I would have when I was younger. Not that I'm an old man or anything. I'm not saying that, but even so, the juice of it and the power of the practice for me is it's not so aligned with being able to do the postures to the nth degree. And I was never like the super flexible person or the super strong person. I was always kind of like in the middle of both of those anyway, kind of grew outward in both directions. I got more flexible. I got stronger as well. So I think that's really where I'm at with it. It's more not avoidance of anything, just pulling back on the degree to which I'm going to do it.
It just goes back to what you were saying earlier in the conversation is awareness, right? So,
very important.
well, but I think that, and I was speaking to Jules Mitchell about this. There are people, most yogis, when we begin, we don't have that kind of awareness. Like we don't know our limitations yet. We don't know where our edge is. We know, progressive overload is the key. You should proceed slowly, that sort of thing. Do you have any sort of insight that you would like to share with folks who are, whether it's Ashtanga or not, like a way that they can build their practice over time in an intentional way versus just jumping in cannonball style?
I mean, it's hard to get beginners to recognize slow and steady kind of wins the race.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been difficult, and you do get students that are happy to not do that. In terms of the experience itself, I think sometimes you have to let people burn out a little bit, kind of, not injure themselves. I'm not suggesting that, but they kind of just need to get into doing it so they have enough experience to then develop that awareness. And I think instead of just saying that there's a way to kind of get people to feel that or do that, it's more just recognizing the part of the process that a student is in and give them what they need at that moment and interject the pulling back or the questioning. A lot of times for me, it's like, people will ask me a question like, where am I supposed to feel this? And And I answer with a question. I say, where are you feeling it?
Right.
And they say, I don't know,
Right.
sometimes.
That's true.
And
That's true.
and to me, that it says a lot about the level of awareness they have of their own body, not in a judgmental way, but in terms of how I'm going to relate to them, how I'm going to describe things to them, or the instructions that I would give them, you know. And then I would also then keep pushing them back to find out what is happening, what their experience is,
Mm-hmm.
what it feels like in their body. And I think it just develops that way rather than trying to figure out a way to get people to figure it out faster than they can.
Right. And can this tie back into the yoga anatomy content? So maybe they don't know where they're feeling it, but you can ask, uh, what happens if we tighten your hamstrings a little? Can you contract your glutes? Does that help heighten
Sure.
awareness? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we were, David and I were talking a little bit before the podcast began. I found out that David is a student of John Scott's. Will you tell folks a little bit about who John Scott is, and just talk a little bit about how you got to work with him and maybe some gold you extracted from him?
Sure. I met John at the end of 2001. I was overseas. My first international yoga anatomy workshops had been scheduled. Yes.
Excellent.
And one of them was in a place called Penzance, which is in Cornwall in England, which is the bottom southwest tip. Like the next town over is called Land's End, because that's the end of the island,
Right.
kind of thing. Anyway, I had gotten John's book on Amazon. I had pre-ordered it. I was in that phase of Astanga. Just get anything you can, because resources, as you said, were limited. So I ordered the book. It was fantastic. My friend mentioned to me that I could study with him for a week. I said 1 week. I booked 2 weeks of study with John, which was going to be self-practice or Mysore style, as we were discussing. And proceeded to practice with John for 2 weeks. And I realized it was the realization of what a teacher was for me. It was like, oh, I mean, I had done classes, it wasn't technically my first ever Ashtanga teacher, but he was certified because he spent many years in Mysore, spent a lot of time with Pattabhi Joyce and studying there and going off and practicing and coming back and that whole thing. And there was a breadth and depth to his teaching that I had not experienced prior to that. There was also a particular style of teaching, John, and that worked very well for me. John is super inquisitive, always asking why, wondering why, and that definitely suits my mind as well. And so we would have these conversations. I would ask why, and he would actually give me an answer.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Context. It would be an answer specifically, and then how it fit into this broader picture. And I think, I mean, John taught me just as much about the practice as being a teacher, and what that looks like, and how you model the practice, how you push things back onto people, how you maintain all kinds of stuff. I learned a lot of that. Positive reinforcement. A whole bunch of things I got from John. There's lots of little specific techniques and stuff like that I got over the years, but in a very broad sort of general way, method of teaching as well as method of practice.
Right.
He told me on the first visit, as it turned out, long story short, I ended up doing a couple-hour anatomy workshop for him on those 2 weeks that was unplanned prior to my arrival. He invited me back to teach with him 3 months later. He said, you can come and teach anatomy on a course that I'm doing. You can be a participant as long as you also book a ticket to Mysore and you go meet Pattabhi Joyce.
That's cool.
And yeah, he was all about. He thought it was so important to meet Pattabhi Joyce at that point, and it was totally the right thing to do.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Now, for the folks who don't know, if you get a chance, just I imagine you can Google John Scott, and imagine there are video clips. I know there are
Oh
YouTube
yeah,
clips, and
sure.
John was the first person that I had seen like do like all the levitations and the jump backs and the jump throughs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it really took, for me, it took the practice to a whole other level. And I'm really glad to hear that he's an amazing teacher. Is John still practicing primary, secondary,
Yeah, John is
advanced and stuff?
still at it. Third series, the whole thing.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So can you, well, let me come back to that question. Let's go to this one.
Okay.
Do you do anything other than yoga? Do you cross train?
No, I don't at the moment.
And why?
Um, Time,
Okay.
energy.
Okay.
Um, I don't. I've never been a really strong, fitness person. I not to like make a box and throw a bunch of
Sure.
people in there, or whatever that is, but um, yoga is kind of all I've ever done. Um, does it have its parts that are missing? Sure. Cardio's,
Mhm.
different but I don't cross train. I
Okay.
don't.
But it's not because of like some hard and fast rule, like you lose all your benefits of yoga
No, no,
if you
no, no,
cross train. It's
no.
just a
You can
choice.
successfully cross train and still practice. No
Okay.
problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember, I don't know if it's still around, but it used to be no benefit, right? It was like, wait, you ran, there's no benefit. You have to like, go
Yeah,
do primary series. Okay, so
yeah.
it's just a choice and just
It's a choice.
a
Yeah.
matter of time. Okay, awesome. Now, what was the other question? Oh, I totally forgot. Can you tell us a little bit about the content that you have on your website? I know you've got some terrific online stuff. I'm in the middle of your yoga adjustments video downloads,
Yeah.
like 45 of those things.
I
It's
know.
great. It's
I know.
very it's interesting. It's illuminating. I don't want to give away too much, but will you tell us a little bit about your online content?
Sure. Well, I've got, I don't know if I can even remember all of it. I have my first Yoga Anatomy videos, of course, which was basically a very simple presentation of a short version of workshops, which was done in 2008, very low production quality. It's funny because I remember having the conversation with the videographer about whether or not we were going to put it on VHS or DVD.
Right. Yeah.
I'm like, anyway, it went to DVD. So I've got yoga anatomy videos. I've got the hands-on adjustment you were referring to, which was a really fun and very large
Mhm.
production with
Yeah.
5 different students and 44 postures or whatever it is. That was 5 days
Yeah.
of filming. It was good fun. It was
Yeah.
good fun. But
How did
that's the kind of stuff I like to put out there. Like, not anyway. Um, we've got online courses for teacher training programs, both at the 200 and 300 hour level, or combine the two together. I've got a comprehensive course, which kind of pulls everything together in one package. I just did a dropbacks workshop that I released. Lotus. Lotus is popular, so there's a
Mhm.
Lotus workshop on there as well. I feel like there's something else. There's more to come still. We've got plans. I've got lots of stuff. I've got endless number of projects that I'd like to do at some point.
Awesome. And what's
Yeah.
what's the website? How can people find that?
It's yoganatomy.com. And some of the articles are literally from 2000, I
Gotcha.
think. And I don't, there's probably 150, 180 articles on the website at this point. Loads of traffic, which is great.
Yeah.
Lots of good comments, some very interesting stuff from people. Yeah, it's a very rich resource website. It's got something for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. I recommend anyone listening or watching check it out. It's a very good resource. Video clips, like you said, articles,
Yeah.
and if they can invest in the online stuff because you get the downloads, you get streaming. It's
Sure.
very it's like my brother would say, it's all killer, no filler. It
Yeah,
gets right into it. It's really
yeah,
good.
yeah. I don't mess around.
Now, one question that I ask a lot of folks on the podcast. May I ask how old are you these days? How old are you right now?
I'm 47.
Congrats. I'm
Thank you.
51. Now, if you could go back and speak to your 20-year-old self, and your 20-year-old self would listen, what are three things you would tell your 20-year-old self that would keep him safe and healthy and able to practice yoga to the age 47 and beyond?
Um, so this is relative to yoga, right? The other stupid mistakes that a 21-year-old would make, right?
Let's keep it to yoga.
Yeah, let's keep it to yoga. Um, I think it would, if I could get myself to do the work that I'm doing now earlier, I would do that, which was, you know, don't take the posture so seriously for
Mhm.
real. Not just say that, but actually do that for real. I've been lucky. I haven't had a lot of injuries from yoga. I did have a torn meniscus, but that's a bigger story that we don't need to unpack. But there are
Right.
certainly other factors going on there. But I would definitely tell my 20-year-old self to be a little bit more mindful of how I treat my hips and knees in
Mhm.
particular on one side, especially. Um, Third might be to to start a meditation practice sooner.
Mhm. Why is that?
I mean, it's not like I feel like I waited too long or anything like that, but there was also no reason to wait as long as I did. I waited for the right teacher to kind of show up,
Mhm.
and they did, and I embraced it, and I had my meditation practice. So it was kind of always my plan. Um, but if I could whisper in their ear where to go for that teaching earlier, I would have done that.
Right. Excellent.
Yeah.
And I guess you meditate every day?
I have a regular meditation practice.
Excellent. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes?
Typically 20 minutes.
Okay. That's fair. I think the average is 30 minutes a day, 5 to 6 days a week. Does that seem about right?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And I know it depends on person and time and stuff. Um, who was it? Was it Victor Davich? He had 8-minute meditations, at least just to get you started, right? You start small and
Sure.
build up incrementally. Would you agree with that?
Um, yeah. I mean, it all depends on type of meditation you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing concentration work to show things? Are you doing other kind of, it's a big rabbit hole. So
Right.
depending on what you're doing, you might need more time or less time or,
But kind of like you were saying with yoga, is like just start. Like
yeah,
the,
yeah.
you'll start reaping the benefits immediately, and you'll eventually find your way. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay.
I'd like to say that eventually you'll find your way. And that is the thing that kept me from pursuing it deeply. Of course, over the years, I've done meditations, but
Sure.
not as my own personal regular practice from a teacher. The only caveat is, if you're being guided by, some app or something like that, then that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Um, for me, I wanted to know where it was leading.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm going to sit, I want to know why I'm sitting. Not necessarily fully know why,
Right.
but have a sense of this is leading me. I'm very much about process, as you know
Yeah,
already.
for
You
sure.
know, so what is the process here? I don't need to know all the details of the future, but that there is a path that's laid out. If I do this, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, and this. And so the caveat was, don't just do something, know where you're trying to get to.
Right.
Have a direction. I'm always cautious to use the word goal, but know that there's a path laid out in front of you, and there's a developmental component to that that's going to lead you where you want to get to.
Gotcha. Right. And then that just kind of goes back to, it's kind of like you have to start, because then you'll know if you're heading in the wrong direction, because you started.
Right.
You can always back up and go the other way, right? But you can't just sit and think about it. You've got to get up and do it, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
You got to do it.
Yeah.
100%.
Awesome. Is there anything that we missed? Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, we covered quite a lot of ground.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, awesome. Well, David, if you will, please just let folks know the name of your book, where they can find it.
Sure. The book, again, is called Functional Anatomy of Yoga, and you can easily find it on Amazon.
Amazon.com.
Yep.
And let people know your website, please.
Which is Yoga Anatomy, or yoganatomy.com.
Awesome. Well, David, thanks so much for taking time to speak with us today, and hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks.